Today we're going to talk about a story that feels like it's straight out of a dystopian novel, but here's the crazy part. It actually happened. This is the story of the Weimar Republic in Germany, and how a nation's money, and then its very soul, was utterly destroyed.
You know, to really get what happened in Germany, we first have to understand what inflation truly is. And this quote from Daniel Webster, it just hits the nail on the head. Inflation isn't just some abstract number going up on a chart. It's a hidden tax. It's a way of transferring wealth. It's basically a very clever form of theft that preys on people who don't even see it coming.
So how did one of the most advanced countries in the world end up in this kind of abyss? Well, the catastrophe of the 1920s didn't just happen by accident. Nope. It was the direct result of a couple of really bad decisions made years before, which basically planted a ticking time bomb right in the heart of the German economy.
These were the two big mistakes. First, instead of just taxing its citizens to pay for World War I, the German government decided to put the whole thing on a credit card. They financed it with debt, thinking, hey, no problem, we'll win the war and pay it all back then. Well, they lost, and that debt was still there. And then came mistake number two, signing the Treaty of Versailles, which piled this insane, impossible bill for war reparations right on top of the debt they already had.
This created the perfect trap. The government owed a fortune, both to its own people who'd bought war bonds and to the Allies. But its economy was a wreck. So what do? With their backs against the wall, they reached for the only tool they had left, the printing press. They just started printing money to pay the bills.
And this decision to just print money, let me tell you, it wasn't some boring policy debate. By 1923, it had turned into a surreal, daily nightmare for every single German citizen. It got so bad, they called it wheelbarrow inflation.
Just look at the speed of this collapse. We're not talking about a decade here. This is all in a single year. In January, $1 US cost 18,000 marks. By July, it was over 350,000. Come September, it's almost 100 million. And by November, the number is just meaningless. 4.2 trillion marks for a single dollar. The money was basically worthless. 1 trillion. That is how many of the new paper marks it took to equal the value of a single gold mark from before the war. A coin you could hold in your hand was now worth a literal mountain of paper. It's just mind-boggling.
And this is the image that everyone remembers. And no, it's not an exaggeration. The actual paper banknotes became so worthless that it cost more to print them than what they were worth. People were literally using stacks of cash as firewood or letting their kids use them as building blocks because it was cheaper than buying actual wood or toys.
Can you even imagine this? You get paid not every month, not every week, but every single day, sometimes even twice a day. And the second you got that cash, you and your family would literally run to the stores. You had to spend it within hours because by the next morning, that money might be worth half as much. The game wasn't about saving, it was about getting rid of money as fast as you possibly could for anything real.
This economic chaos, though, it did something so much worse than just destroying people's bank accounts. It dissolved the very glue that holds a society together, things like trust, morality, law, and order. When a country's money dies, the society itself starts to die along with it.
And think about it. When people lose everything, their savings, their pensions, their entire future, they don't blame some abstract economic force. No, they look for a villain. This deep, desperate need to find someone, anyone, to blame for all the suffering just took over the entire country.
And people started pointing fingers everywhere. They blamed the speculators who were getting rich off the chaos. They blamed foreigners who were using their strong currencies to buy up German businesses for practically nothing. They blamed the big industrialists. And, this is where it gets really dark, they blamed the Jews, digging up all sorts of old, poisonous prejudices. Basically, anyone who looked like they were surviving or even doing well became an enemy.
But here's the thing. All of that finger-pointing was just focused on the symptoms. The real culprit wasn't a group of people. It was the policy. It was the head of their central bank who, and you won't believe this, actually insisted that there was no connection between printing insane amounts of money and its value crashing. The real cause was the government's addiction to that printing press.
This table really breaks it down. It shows you exactly who won and who lost. If you had a bunch of debt, you basically hit the jackpot. Big industrialists borrowed billions to build their empires, and then paid off those huge loans with money that was worth less than toilet paper. But if you were one of the prudent ones, if you saved your money, if you had a pension, you were destroyed. The entire middle class, the stable foundation of German society, was financially wiped out.
So by late 1923, it was clear this nightmare had to end. But stopping an addiction this bad is never painless. The cure was a kind of economic shock therapy, and it came with its own brutal price tag, and a legacy that would haunt Germany for years to come.
The government was now stuck between a rock and a hard place. They could keep the printing presses running, which meant total chaos would continue, but weirdly, unemployment was low, because companies could always pay people with worthless money. Or they could slam on the brakes, stop the printing, and stabilize the currency. But that would cause a huge wave of bankruptcies and mass unemployment. It was literally a choice between two different kinds of poison.
They chose stability. This new guy, Dr. Hjalmar Schacht, was brought in, and his plan was brutally simple. First, he just stopped the printing presses. Cold turkey. Second, he brought in a whole new, stable currency. Third, he balanced the budget. And fourth, he just had to face the music. Unemployment went through the roof as the whole artificial system collapsed.
So they stopped the economic bleeding. The money was stable again. But the psychological damage was already done. An entire generation of people had been taught that saving money was for suckers and that the government could wipe you out overnight. This created this deep, deep trauma and a desperate yearning for a strong leader, for someone who had promised to restore order and pride, no matter what it took.
And this is the most chilling conclusion of all. The hyperinflation didn't just bankrupt a country, it created the perfect political storm. All that fear, that anger, the search for scapegoats, and the humiliation of the middle class. It created the fertile ground where Nazism could grow. It is no coincidence that Hitler's first attempt to seize power happened in November 1923, right at the absolute peak of the chaos. It failed then, but the movement had found its audience in the wreckage.
Now, it would be a huge mistake to look at all this and just think, wow, that was a crazy German thing, because the pattern of currency collapse is a timeless one. As they say, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme. Just look at the French Revolution. Over a century earlier, the government was broke. Their solution? Hey, let's print a new paper money, the assignat, and say it's backed by land we took from the church. What happened? The exact same thing. First, everyone was optimistic. Then they printed more and more and more. The value collapsed. There was chaos. Sound familiar? It's the same playbook.
So what's the big takeaway here? Hyperinflation is never, ever just an economic event. It's a political and a moral disaster. It hauls out the middle class, it dissolves the trust that holds people together, and it creates a desperate population that is willing to listen to any extremist who promises an easy way out. When you boil it all down, the story of Weimar Germany is a brutal lesson in why sound money is so important. A stable, trustworthy currency isn't just a convenient way to buy your groceries. It's one of the foundational pillars of a free and orderly society. It's what allows us to plan, to save, and to build for the future.
And that leaves us with one final, sobering question. The people in Germany back then didn't think their currency could collapse either, right up until the moment it did. It really makes you wonder, what happens when we start to take that stability for granted? What happens when we forget just how fragile that pillar really is?